not making eye contact, looking down, left or right, as though I were vermin, less than human. Those that finally meet my gaze are shocked. I'm a woman. Their eyes betray their flash of pity and at the same time disgust. As a woman living on the street, I'm lower than the muck that fills the drain grids. At first I had nowhere else to go but here, under the railway arches near Waterloo Station, a few paces from the Union Jack Club. I still can't believe I'm here, trying to survive on what I can beg or am given by the street angels. I cringe when people get too close to me. The smell, rank, raw, deep and animal, will get them reeling backwards and make them gag. The trick I had as a policewoman when dealing with houses that were known to be full of shit and filth or dead bodies was to use Vic Vapour Rub or menthol stick rubbed underneath my nostrils, so that all I could smell on breathing in was that overpowering mint and not the smell of death. You can't believe it, can you? Me, the stinky homeless woman of indiscriminate age, shape and looks, a policewoman once upon a time. You don't believe it, do you? In 1975 I joined the police cadets. They were a bit like Boys Brigade, Boy Scouts and Girl Guides all rolled into one. It was marvellous. I knew I didn't want to stay on at the grammar school, and I'd always had an interest in all things policey. My family were appalled, and every single one of them said how my life would be ruined and what a waste. My dad especially took umbrage at my decision to join. He said it wasn't a fit career for a decent lass and I would be no daughter of his. I cried at that, and he even used that against me, saying I wouldn't last 5 minutes in the police because I was too soft. He stuck to his word, and for 2 whole years he didn't speak to me. At the dinner table, if I asked him to pass the salt or the sauce or anything, if I talked to him about anything at all, he'd say to me mum, "Tell your daughter I don't wish to speak to her." Mum would well up, ready to cry, and I'd say, all cheesy like, because I knew it got his goat, "Don't worry, Mum, I know he loves me really." Actually, I knew he didn't love me really. He loved my brothers, favoured them always over me. I think that's why I was such a tomboy. I just noticed early on that lads were given an easy time of it and favoured, and wives and girls were just treated like shit. I suppose in that sense, the cadets, me being a tomboy, the cadets really suited me. It was marvellous. And we were sent to the local technical college to study for A-levels in law, maths and English. I didn't escape the study I hated so much at the grammar school. But the technical college and the cadets seemed easier somehow, and we were treated as adults. I loved it. Directing traffic, well, it's quite a skill. I was one of the lads quite quickly, but felt I had to act like a tough nut to prove I was one of them and not soft. Quickly got into the habit of falling into the police club for a drink or 10. I always knew I was attracted to women and not men, but I felt I couldn't act on my feelings. In that day and age, being gay was the pits, and the focus of every nasty joke you heard, apart from the ones about fat people, women, any women, and dare I say it, jokes about race or any other bit of difference. Hard to think back to those times in some senses. Though I was bright, young and going places, yeah, it was a difficult time, but a good time. I was the youngest woman in Yorkshire to pass my sergeant's exam. The youngest woman ever, in fact. My dad was speaking to me of sorts by then. I recall telling him while he was digging up his spuds on the allotment and going on about Burma Jack being a decent sort of fella really, because he shared his produce when dads didn't do well. He paused for a minute, leaned on his spade, looked over my left shoulder and said, "Well, I suppose that's good, but it's still a man's job, you know." That was as glowing as he ever got. Mother never challenged him or said out. I think deep down she was scared of him. Everyone knew he was a bullying, misogynistic prat. And if I stood up to him, she'd beg me not to cause problems and say he was all she had. That made me feel invisible. Spent my bloody life being invisible. A lot of the lads used alcohol to deal with the stress, the death, the disgusting things people did to people. How else could they cope? I used it too. Used it to deal with the lads themselves as well as the Joe public and the detritus of life. We had a lot of laughs though, and we were a close-knit sort of family really. But as everyone knows, family can be fucking awful, letting you down in all sorts of ways. I recall going to a job in the old part of town and being warned by the duty sergeant, don't have a cup of tea and watch where you walk. Well, I knew which house it was as we drove up the street. Gaudy painted front door, huge ornamental lions next to an enormous caravan big enough to house a family. And it did. Anyway, we went in this place and the floor was brown and the walls were brown and the smell, God, the smell. My boots were sticking to the floor. Then I realised on seeing 3 Alsatian dogs and various other animals what it was. Fucking hell, said PC439N. Anyway, then the dogs went mad, howling, barking. Then they started shitting and adding to the brown walls and floor. Neighbour dispute, a regular thing with this family. Their dad had his 4 kids and was living there, and he had his mistress and their 4 kids living in the caravan. He was called Eric Smithers, Nobby Smithers to his mates. Cracks me up to think about it even now. These archways not changed since Victorian times. The water drips down constantly, more so when the trains rumble overhead. It's so cold and dank. I can't feel my hands and feet. It's not more than a few steps from the Union Jack Club. That hotel's for armed forces, ex-forces, soldiers, all that manner of personnel. Nice place. I used to be allowed to stay there, ex-police, see, but that was years ago when I was semi-decent. There used to be a soldier living here under the arches as well. Just a few yards from their club and nobody gave him any help. He said they called him Brick. Funny name. I think it was on account of him being as big as a brick outhouse. He disappeared after a couple of months. I heard he'd been beaten up by a gang of lads, and he never recovered. Shame. But at least he's out of this hellhole now. I wish I was. But even exiting this life is so ruddy difficult. Although I suppose I could walk in front of a bus, or fall into a canal. I wonder where the nearest one is. I was good at my job. I had the highest arrest record in the region. I was always viewed as a good bet with good outcomes going to court. I was caring and very human too, with the druggies, the prostitutes and the petty thieves. The alcoholics were always the hardest to deal with, unpredictable and aggressive. They were low down on the list of priorities for help. At the end of each shift, especially 12-hour nights, we all sort of fell apart, or fell into the club and hit the beers. In those days, everywhere we stopped, shop-wise, they pushed stuff on us, freebies, you know. One time this men's clothing store in Station Road had been burgled, and me and Cy Smith were in attendance. Well, I know I had very short hair then, easier to look after, see, old perps and nutters couldn't grab hold of my long locks and drag me down. Anyway, the Chinese guy that owned the store took one look at us and came back from the stockroom with Levi jeans for us both. There, he said, new jeans for you boys. Good jeans for you. Small boy size and big boy size. All for you. Thank you so much. After that, the lads on the shift called me small boy. I had to take it, laugh as much as them, swear as much as them, be as uncaring as about who I slept with, all the same as them. Just part of the big happy police family. Did I say? Sorry, my name's Georgia. Georgie, or George, not a small boy. The lads got bored of that after about a year and went on to the next big wind-up. A newbie, probationer, who was quite a nervous lad. His dad was a retired inspector in the British Transport Police and his mum worked at A&E in St James's, so he thought, public service, that's what I need to do. I felt a bit sorry for him. He had that air about him, dead meat. We all knew he wouldn't last. Did drink, see, so no safety valve. I could see it happening, the unravelling, the knotted stuff becoming unknotted. Simple, uncontrolled, like the inside of a golf ball. You ever seen the inside of a golf ball split open? Mad, it's just mad. Me and our Billy used to retrieve the lost golf balls on the local course, sneak on, fill our school bags or rucksacks, take them home, scrub them with a nail brush and sell them back for 50p a ball. What a brilliant business that was. Happy days. The golfers never complained, though the greensman caught me once. Our Bill legged it and left me. The greensman thrashed me. Said I should be at home with my mum baking and helping in the house. I was appalled, outraged. Who was he to talk to me like that just because I was a lass? Didn't mean I couldn't be out playing. I needed to be adventurous. I suppose women have always been made to suffer for any small freedoms we thought we'd earned. Women have had a dreadful time of it one way and another. I was just thinking that before that street cleaning fella tried to move me along. 1975 to 1980, what a dreadful dark time for women in Yorkshire. Peter Sutcliffe didn't just murder 13 prostitutes, all victims of misogyny. He caused a terrible backtracking of freedom for women in Yorkshire. The world suddenly got nasty, scary and small, like a deflatable globe going down while making farty noises. What was going on in his head, I wonder? What made him kill that first woman in Keighley? What was that trigger, that push? I can't fathom it still. I worked on the door-to-door inquiries for a time. That was bad enough. Seeing the fear, not being able to answer the questions, wondering if any males I interviewed could be the murderer. I stopped sleeping around that time, and a sort of madness of my own overtook me. I was like a whirling dervish, although I don't really think I knew what that was. I decided to go for my sergeant's exam early. I needed to climb the ladder. Position's power, that's a fact. I needed to get out, get away from the lads on the ground. My division seemed so heavy with crime, corruption, prejudice and dark deeds. That was just the police themselves. The interview was harder than the written exam, though I got them on side. Said I wanted to be an inspiration like them, and if I was half as good a lass as them, I'd still be more than enough of a girl to do a good job for them. I wanted to inspire others. They lapped it up, all male high-ranking bods. And shortly after that I got the acceptance letter. I moved to Headingley. All spotty students and seedy pubs. Knockoff was the biggest industry. It was blatant. I was even offered a hi-fi system, as they were called then, in the pub near the cricket ground. The King William, I think it was called. Big bills. There was always some banter about me being like Bill. They all knew I was a police officer. The guy bought me a drink. I don't recall anything else. Woke up on the cricket ground, cold and wet, clothing missing, shivering, shocked. Drank half a bottle of some crap left over from a holiday on the Costa del Sol called Fundador brandy. I could recall the writing on the label, bright red. Sat in the shower all the following morning. Hot water scalding my skin, alternating between screams, crying, silence, drinking and urinating in the shower. My skin was as red as the writing on the label. Cold and sick, of course. Stayed at home, too shook up to set foot outside the door. Now that really shocked me. Me, a hardened policewoman, seen it all, been everywhere, and suddenly I was so frightened, my teeth clattered so loudly I thought I'd crack one. The results came in fairly quickly. Dear old Girolamo Frascatero. I don't know whether I should curse him or thank him for discovering syphilis. The mathematician who was into medical discoveries. Still, at least it wasn't anything worse. I can't even think about that. I went to the National Gallery a few years ago. I was less street scum then, so I wasn't challenged by security. The warmth was lovely. Although it did create a bit of a pong when my 4 layers of clothing started to dry out. The months of sweat, rain and urine certainly created a bit of a fugue. An old lady stood next to me in the portrait gallery and asked me if I could smell anything funny. I fixed her with an interesting look and said, "No, just something deadly serious." She walked off looking very confused. I noticed then I was standing in front of a portrait of a magnificent looking man, aged about 27. Girolamo in 1528. I was eventually ejected by some heavies for the crime of causing a disturbance. I could tell they didn't want to touch me. My clothes, my filthy clothes. But they had to, grabbed me on either side as they marched me out. So I started screaming, "You pigs! Fascist pigs! I was a police officer once, you know. I've got a right to come here. I need to look at culture. Pigs!" It's not easy being a non-entity. Less than human. I suppose it was the early 90s when I realised I first had a problem. I was wandering around the aisles of Safeway looking for a bleach-free alternative for getting nasty stains out of carpets. Another heavy night off. When I realised I'd wandered into the wines and spirits aisle and was shaking and sweating so badly I thought I could hardly stand. I grabbed 3 bottles of cheap white wine and a bottle of gin. Up until then, the only spirits I'd had need of was the alcoholic wipes we coppers carried around with us everywhere. Infection control, you know. I left Safeway sharply, head down. Didn't want to bump into anybody I might know. Sitting in the car, opening the bottle of gin and a carton of Kia Ora orange juice, I just knew I wouldn't last long. It was around that time my dad died. He'd had chest pains, stabbing pains. My mother said he'd left pins in the new shirt and they were sticking in him. He was well known for it. He didn't stop his grumbling, and she didn't stop dishing up the dinner. It was meatloaf, peas and mash, and she said it went cold too quickly to mess about with his shirt. He collapsed and died before he even got his fork to his mouth, before he even ate his favourite pudding. I don't think I felt sorry. We were never bonded. I wasn't a lad, see? He never cared for me. I was a challenge. I decided to go for counselling. The force offered support like that. The minute I laid eyes on her, I was in love with her. I longed for those appointments every week. Normally the lads stayed well away from her door because they knew she reported back to the chief and personnel areas of concern, you know. I longed for that 1 hour every week. Told her everything, spilled my guts out. I trusted her. My love and adoration knew no bounds. It was such a shock when she reported my drinking. My alcohol dependence, she called it. I was suspended on pay. Gardening leave. Although by then I'd moved to a 3rd floor flat in Headingley, so I didn't have a garden. That was the last straw. Seems like yesterday in some ways, years ago in another. And I probably smell like I've never had a wash in years. I wish I had a life.